Hey now, it's Danny Eberhard here, and welcome to the Growing the Future podcast, where we talk to folks who like to innovate, collaborate, and transform the agricultural industry. In this case, we got some guys that like to play and sing on the podcast. This is probably brand new for our show, but thank you so much for joining us for season 5, episode 7. I'm really excited to see where this episode is going to go. I'm speaking with a musician who's made a living out of his art, a musician and a writer who I guess I know through my ecosystem of friends back in southeastern Saskatchewan. And we're going to talk about some very interesting trials and tribulations, and growth as human beings. Today, I'm very excited for the conversation. But before I introduce today's esteemed guest, I would like to remind you to check out the Eberhard family of companies online, starting with eberhardfarms.com, where we grow food to feed the world in Langeberg, Saskatchewan. Suregrowth.ca, where we offer precision agronomy consulting services. Convergencegrowth.com, where we accelerate solutions across food, health, and agriculture. AberhardAgSolutions.ca, where we deliver one-of-a-kind fertility solutions of the future to your farm. You can get notified about all of our new episodes by signing up for our newsletter at growingthefuturepodcast.ca. My next guest was born and raised on the edge of Saskatchewan's Moose Mountain Provincial Park, and you can just hear that thread just all throughout his music. All throughout his music. It shapes his music. His rural upbringing shaped his outside-of-the-box approach to his career. He was just telling me about how he likes to always push his bounds in every aspect of his life. His songwriting is delivered in a road-worn manner. I think he's got 10,000 hours, Malcolm Gladwell, under his belt there, belting his tunes out on the road. With his longtime band, The Vultures. However, the songs take on an intimacy through his storytelling abilities when alone on a stage. I want to hear you at Good Street Hall in Erickson, Manitoba. By the way, we can talk about that. But his songwriting has been nominated for awards from the Saskatchewan Country Music Association, the Western Canadian Music Association, the Canadian Country Music Association, and the Independent Music Awards. So let's just say, sum it up, award winning. In 2024, he will release his 6th studio album. And if you stick around to the end of this podcast, I don't know how long this can be. I think it could be a little bit of a longer conversation. But if you stick around, folks, till the end of this conversation, you will get a taste of that live. His 6th studio record, What's Left of the Right, a concept album about Saskatchewan's current political and social climate, is going to be released strategically through his Substack, where you can read his sentiments about his life, his experiences, his thoughts, his opinions. Very accomplished writer. Today we're going to talk about a plethora of things, folks. We're going to talk about this individual's history growing up on the farm in southeastern Saskatchewan. We're going to talk about his entrepreneurial model as a writer and a musician. I'm very fascinated by that. We're going to talk about his growth as an individual through his endeavors. Personal development, I think, is going to be a big theme that we want to touch on. He recently wrote about the passing of his father. We want to talk about that legacy and what that meant to him. And maybe some of the politics, they say sex, politics, and religion, you should never talk about that, but we don't shy away from that on this show. Welcome to the show, Blake Berglund.
My man. Thanks
This
for
is
the
something.
most humbling intro. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Well, before we really get into like your background and everything, give the listeners, I guess, or the viewers a little bit of a context. You showed the behind the scenes on social media. Hope our fans get to catch that, but you showed a little bit of the context of behind the scenes of where you are. Give us a snapshot of where you're located right now, the room that you're in, the context of that. I don't want to give away whose piano it was, but there's some stories there. Start us where you are, and then we're going to rewind and go right back to the beginning, my friend. Where are you at
Well,
right now?
I'm currently in Nashville, Tennessee. Actually, not specifically in Nashville, just a little bit east of Nashville. It's Hermitage. I believe it was a farming community that kind of the city basically is enveloped and kind of grew in and around. And I was contacted a few weeks ago with an opportunity that I just could not pass up, and I found myself that following Monday on an airplane, and I'm here for a little while, predominantly writing. I've been just writing my butt off, and I'm staying in a little farmhouse at the bottom of a hill. And what you were referencing was this piano from 1887. It was commissioned for Queen Victoria. It has had a handful of owners, which following Queen Victoria was Miles Davis. It's Miles Davis's grand piano, and it is in a farmhouse. That's Nashville. Like, that's the craziest thing about this city that I love. Why I love coming here is because you just say yes to things, and then you're staying in a house with a piano that had this piano belonged to Phil Collins, and the most recent owner, I believe, was Eric Clapton. So it's Eric Clapton, Phil Collins, Miles Davis, and Queen Victoria's piano. It's just me and the piano.
So what is the
Farmhouse. There
vibe
was
when you sit at a piano like that with that kind of legacy? I mean, what goes through a man?
well, I walked in to this place and I saw it and I was like, oh my goodness, there's this beautiful old grand piano. And I was just compelled to sit down, and I kind of, my creative process immediately kicks in and I start banging around. That's sort of my approach to my art, is I just start banging around and smashing stuff and hammering things out. And I don't want to say it lacks respect, but there's definitely a curiosity to it all and a willingness just to like bash my way into what I want to create. And I was sitting down, hammering out some scales, screwing up, not really thinking anything too serious. And I took a little bit of a breather and I looked to the right of me, and there was this framed list of owners. It was an official document of ownership. And I I froze, and then I jumped off of the piano bench and about 4 steps back and had chills running down my body. And it was as if I begged the piano for forgiveness. I was like, wow, I had no idea that you were who you are. And I was definitely treating this instrument with no respect. And it's been a forgiving instrument. I've spent a lot of time with it over the past few weeks. There were tornado warnings. I don't know if you heard a few weeks ago down in
I
Nashville.
did.
Yeah, it scared the heck out of me. And the warnings passed, and this really beautiful lightning storm came in, and it was just lighting up the house through the big picture window. And I sat on this piano and I wrote. I really channeled this energy of the farm. I've been writing a lot about the farm. I've been writing a lot about, you mentioned it a bit in the intro, but the passing of my father. I've been writing a lot about these much more sentimental, tender aspects of, just where I grew up. And yeah, the piano delivered. I put a really nice piece together, and my dad, it literally mentions in the song my dad waking me up in the night to play Great Balls of Fire, because that's what he used to do. I'd be sleeping, and
Great
he
balls of
would come
fire.
in. Yeah, Jerry Lee Lewis. Yeah, he's like,
Yeah.
get up, hey, get up, you gotta come play me a song quick. And it'd be like 11 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock, and
He
I
wanted you
would.
to play that on the piano.
Yeah, yeah, I always played for my dad all the time. He'd wake me
Did your
up.
dad play?
Not a, well, yeah, air piano. He'd sit at the kitchen table, and as I'd play the actual piano, he'd pretend to play alongside me at the kitchen table. But yeah, no, he was a showman, right? But he was never a musician, I guess. But he always really encouraged that in me. That was a big reflection on when he passed, was the realization that of all the people in my life that I don't want to call them discouraging, but in the lows in what I do, and the difficulties and the tensions in what I do, in those periods where, it's like farming. The income is boom and bust. It's like you have bumper crops and then you have drought, and it's no different than in creative endeavors. And I think it was my dad's connection and love of agriculture that just showed this incredible support and understanding for the peaks and the valleys in my entrepreneurial and creative endeavors. And he never once discouraged me. He always, I can't think of one time where he said, well, maybe you should consider something else. It was always like, find some clarity, double down, get your nose to the grindstone. I taught you how to work, and get at it, get after it. And that's always been my core philosophy is, why give up? And especially with Dad's death lately, like it's so cliched, right? Life is short, so you never know how close you are to the next level. So yeah, I'm in Nashville right now, and I'm hanging out with Miles Davis's piano, and I'm writing lots of songs. So it's pretty good
You
last few
never felt
weeks.
as though you should farm?
Oh, I have for sure. Even as did you said specifically farming?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, more than ever, to be honest with you, with my brother and my sister Jody taking over the farm, I'm always questioning, and especially now that I have a 2-year-old son and a wife that grew up in not northern Saskatchewan, but by Archerville, Foston, her farming agricultural background, we're always, well, I mean, that's the game plan. Whether we end up, quote unquote, being invested in the farming operation, which I mean, I always have been and always will be, as far as, hey, we need you at harvest. Hey, we need you at seeding. Hey, what are you doing for these next 3 weeks? Hey, and even in the most difficult points of life, if there was a 5 months, that's one really wonderful thing about mom and dad. Right into our adulthood, all four of us kids, myself and my three siblings, off and on, we would move back to the farm. You'd be dating a girl for 3 years and living in Calgary and running out to Vancouver, and life would just hit hard. And the first thing was move back to the farm and heal. And that place was always and always has been a place of, it's the family farm. So there's dynamics, right? It's what has disrupted our lives and what has caused tension and what has truthfully imposed some trauma in all our lives is also the place that you return to heal. And it's also the place that you return to find yourself. And there's nothing like some manual labor. I see manual labor as a spiritual practice, and getting back to the farm, and whether it's fencing or cleaning corrals or working with the horses or feeding cattle, it doesn't matter what it is. Manual labor is a spiritual practice for me. So yeah, getting back to the farm has always been something that's been encouraged. And with the death of Dad in the last little bit, that's my sister Casey. She was in Calgary, and the first thing she did was move back to the farm. She's going between Spain and Kennedy. I'm between Nashville and Kennedy. Jody and Jared are in Kennedy, and mom's in Kennedy, and our family, Dad carried a heavy presence, and there has been a shift of tone at the family farm, and it's been, we're profoundly grieving, and it's a profound heartache, and there's actually a light tone in the rebirth of our family as well. So it's a very complicated, but that's kind of grief, not to jump into grief all of a sudden, but it's one of those things that you don't recognize the slivers of beauty until you face it and you move into it and you lean into it, and then it presents these really wonderful insights that are transformative. And that deep, deep, profound love is one that you can only access through the grieving process. And we're just all healing up, and it's going to be a lifelong process. And we do a lot of it together at the farm. So am I going to farm? Boy, a long time to get around to answering your question. I'm writing songs right now, and I'd like
I
to
feel like
think
you're
that,
farming right now. I feel
I
like it's
mean,
so
it is the
interwoven. Is that
parallels.
the inheritance, being from the farm like that you can always go back to that tether, that anchor, or do you feel like at some point too, we talk about family farms becoming businesses. Does it get away on you, or do you feel like you got to go back and capture that, or is that an inheritance that will be in perpetuity forever? You know what I mean? That link to the land.
I guess it depends on the dynamics of the family, right? And I really, I'm an advocate for succession planning. I'm an advocate just because movement is healthy, right? And even though some parents to children, especially in our family, there was just, there was different philosophies in how things should be approached, and there through that difference of philosophies, the farm grew and the farm expanded. Now, is it inherent to Um, I lost my train of thought. Where were we going with that again?
Well, we were just talking about the land being an anchor, but we all know that the
Right.
business that is the family farm evolves over time. And when I first got to know your sister Jody, through a friend of hers that I was dating at the time, and I also met Casey. I was fortunate enough to meet a bunch of your family. Um, they were organic farmers,
Hmm.
and she said, "Man, I spent a lot of time cultivating." And when they transitioned to conventional, then she was kind of excited. Well, it's different, and she's actually felt that it was better. I'm sure there's pros and cons, but yeah, and then you think about all the different ideas or philosophies of, well, some of you think it should be done this way. Some of you think it should be done that way. Like, it'd be interesting to see where you guys would enter that in the future and how that would all work. But just the spirit of things, obviously, you want to make it work.
Yeah, we all are leaders in our own areas of the family. And my Jody and Jared are leaders in the development of the family agricultural legacy. I am a leader in the emotional development of our family. My sister Casey is a leader, and my mother is a leader in the spiritual development of our family. And it's all these different areas that, given the situation, we kind of know which one of us needs to rise up and carry, not necessarily carry the others, but guide the others into some decision making. Ever since a very young age, and I was really involved. I was really involved in the problem solving, the emotional problem solving of the family dynamic, and that's a role that I continue to carry, and it's different. It's an evolved role because I've advanced emotionally and I've matured emotionally, and there's this idea of parenting the parents, and it kind of works in both directions. We're raised to a point with the best abilities that our parents have, and then given the cultural shifts and given the timeline that we're raised in, we kind of get to give back in an emotional way to help lift our parents up in areas that maybe they weren't as developed in emotionally. And that's been something that, you talk about the family farm, and it's not just the land and it's not just the business, but it's a legacy of unity. And and that's one thing that, as in the Berglund family, that we've all really discovered is this greater legacy, that my songwriting is a part of the legacy of the land and the stewardship, and my sister's, Casey's, developments in wellness and spirituality is part of the legacy that, ushered us through the death of my dad. So it's this one massive project that we all get to rise up into, and when we're called, and we know the we know when, we know who, and we know when to rise up and sort of carry the rest of the family forward.
Oh man, that sounds great. I mean, that sounds like it gives you a certain level of robustness or strength, given all those different talents in the family. And take us back, uh, Blake. I mean, you writing and being a musician gives you an opportunity to share the sentiment of growing up in southeastern Saskatchewan. We have that shared legacy and history. You're sharing that with all of your all of your fans, your readers, your listeners. Obviously, there's some choices along the way, though. I mean, you could have just farmed, or you could have made other choices. But when I was asking Jody about you, because she was actually concerned that you might share a lot about her, Jody, she's like, "Oh, I wonder what you guys are going to talk. You guys will be
Yeah.
able to talk about anything on the podcast, and there's nothing I can do about it." I said, "Exactly, Jody. Like, this is I'm going to get all the juicy deets." But she was sharing some stories that you have about having to miss hockey because you needed to practice for your grade 2 Royal Conservatory. At some
Yeah.
place, like, there's a fork in the road at some place, singing and writing, traveling versus hoeing the land.
Yeah, when I actually would maybe say it's less of a fork in the road and more of an expectation that you need to create the time to do everything with the best intention and focused intention. We didn't get off because I was in piano and because we had hockey. chores were chores. And because we had school, there was still the expectation that at 6 o'clock in the morning, we were up and we were out at the barn. We had a PMU barn for 10 years.
Oh
I believe
wow.
it was 10 years from 93 to 2003, give or take, I think a year. Um, so we had so pregnant mare's urine for listeners. It's an extension of the pharmaceutical industry. I really have a really good bit about it on stage, but we collect very akin to a dairy operation. We collected the urine from pregnant female horses, sold that product to Wyeth Ahurst, the pharmaceutical company in Brandon. They extracted the hormone estrogen from the urine, and they would produce menopausal pills and birth control. So it was very
We were neighbors with Rodney Breyer, who's one of
okay.
the yeah, he had a big PMU farm as well, so we are somewhat familiar.
Yeah, so a very demanding industry.
Yeah.
We had
Hard work.
dozens and dozens of horses on the line. I think at the most we had was 75 on the line, but we had a couple hundred horses around. And it was from the age of 13. I was up with my brother and Joe, and we were up at 6 o'clock in the morning doing 2 hours of chores before school, showering, getting to school, rushing home. If we had hockey immediately after, or piano lessons immediately after school, then chores would usually be late that night, and we had 2 or 3 hours at the end of the night, and like we were doing 5 hours of work every weekday before school and after school. And that just gave us a basis, a really strong basis for responsibility. It gave us a basis of time management. And, with all this said, I did get off a little bit when I was going for my Royal Conservatory because that was a really demanding process. And Jody and Jared covered my back in the mornings where we would be woken up at 6 and I would sit at the piano for an hour and a half and they'd do chores. And that lasted for about a few months when I was training for my conservatory advancements. But then as soon as that was behind me, it was back to the barn. And yeah, our lives were work, hockey, and rock and roll. Like I started writing songs. Dad bought me a guitar at about 16 years old, and I was just all in on it. It was an electric. It was a Fender Squier starter pack with a
Yeah.
little amp, and I was writing from day one. And
What the
what
heck were
to
you
do?
writing about at 16?
What everybody writes about at 16, love. I haven't written about love because I was talking to a songwriter friend of mine the other day, and I said, like, anytime the concept of like a direct love, like a quote unquote love song. I know a lot of my songs, especially lately, are love related. I read about some heavier topics, especially the relationship and the tension between my dad and I. Like, that is a love song. It's a song of a
Mhm.
different version of love. So it's not like I haven't thrown the concept of writing love songs out, but I've definitely thrown the concept of writing your stereotypical love song out because you think that that's what you're supposed to write about when you start, and then you realize that love is so complex and that you don't have the abilities and the tools to properly express the complexity of it, that you can only pick up writing love songs again after 30 years experience, because it's only then that you have this understanding of the tools and the mechanics of songwriting to to properly express that sentiment. Now, 16 years old, I was trying to write love songs, right? And then I got into punk bands and rock bands, and I toured really heavy stuff, like a pseudo metal, hard rock kind of thing, for almost 10 years. And when the rest of my band was like, oh, we got to have a backup plan, and they were going to university and getting into school, I was like, oh, well, my backup plan is going to be country music. So I always
Really?
wanted to be a songwriter. I remember hearing that George Strait didn't write his own songs, and that concept, it just was a revolution for me. Where I was like, what? So who's writing these songs? And a gentleman named Dean Dillon has written the majority of, or a very vast amount of George Strait's hits. And he was one of the first in country music that I was like, well, I don't want to be George Strait. I want to be Dean Dillon. I want to be writing these songs. And this sort of happened in the early 2000s. This was around the time that artists like Big and Rich and Kid Rock was moving into the country community, and it was early, I think, Luke Bryan and early Jason Aldean maybe. And I started doing co-writes with a lot of artists, and forgive me for my honesty, but it was just such a low bar of expectation in artistry that I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I would sit in these rooms in these co-writes with artists, and ideas would be brought to the table, and it was always good enough, good enough, good enough. And that has never been something that I've been able to pull off, is saying, yeah, sure, whatever, I'm not attached to this. And my songwriting was always such a massive force in my well-being and a massive force in my expression that it didn't really matter what kind of money was on the table or what kind of opportunity if the artistry wasn't, and you gotta be able to let go at a certain point for sure in creating. But in the early 2000s, the expectation of what should be created to be brought to radio to fit within the confines that they wanted the product to fit within, it was excruciating artistically for me. And I was just like, well, maybe I'll just sing these songs then. So I kind of started just doing my own writing without the expectation of having someone else sing them. And I've never, it's funny, only till lately I've been a confident singer. And for a very long time, I could scream and I could yell, and I had pitch and decent tone, but I never felt like, oh, I'm a vocalist. So there was always that sort of shortcoming in my approach to my writing, but I've always been a very confident in the fact that I am pursuing a quality in the writing process. And in 2012, I just took the songs and I got into a studio and I put out sort of my first country record. It was called Coyote, and it really opened up the doors career-wise for me. I noticed a major shift in that. I started getting tickets sold and opportunities in all areas of the world. And it was only until that point that I was like, oh, maybe there's something behind this country music thing. And I felt, I
Wow.
just kind of went head over heels into, and we always, growing up, you always listen to George Strait, and you always listen to
Yeah.
Johnny Cash, and you always listen to Merle and Waylon, and the list goes on. But it wasn't until sort of 2012 that I was like, oh, I can occupy a really wonderful space in this genre. And it has worked in my favor, and it has been very difficult to sort of swim against the current when radio wants a certain sound and industry wants a certain sound and management wants a certain sound. And I have turned down more interest, quote unquote interest, where it wasn't really interest into the authenticity of what I'm doing, but I was more interest into, I'm really driven and would get out in the world and hammer down the doors. Literally speaking, I sold CDs door to door for 5 years and sold a whack of my records. And it was that drive that would attract people in the industry to me. And then once push would come to shove and we'd have discussions about the music, it would just always fall flat. And I sort of turned down more opportunities than felt would work in my favor. And in that process, really started to understand the industry, really started to understand the entrepreneurship in it, the sales in it, the marketing in it, how the arts doesn't have to be compromised, that the sky is big enough for all the stars, that the fresher you are as an artist, it might take a little longer, but your star will burn brighter. And well, brings me to today. I am in Nashville right now for some industry opportunities and some aspects of entrepreneurship that I'm moving forward on, because Saskatchewan doesn't have that much infrastructure. You got artists in Winnipeg and everybody gets sort of signed to the same booking agent because they're a Winnipeg artist, or the same couple labels because they're a Winnipeg artist. And there's a similar tone to that in Alberta, and there's a similar tone to that in Toronto, and a similar tone in Vancouver. It's like everybody kind of takes care of their own. And it's not that Saskatchewan doesn't have infrastructure. It just, there is a ton of room for more. And I have some goals to alleviate some of those problems and extend my resources to what I believe is one of the most prolific songwriting. Like Saskatchewan exports some really incredible stuff, and there's room for some more infrastructure, and I'm down here chipping away at that right now.
That's such an interesting commentary, and it gives me a lot of context on what I've heard when I listen to your music, which, your top songs on Spotify come up as surprisingly, from my perspective, surprisingly classic country. I was like, wow, that sound, you talk about George Strait and those old country, not new country. I was like, this is really classic country. And then on your new album, which you just shared with me, Undercover, is that there was some of the maybe different influences coming in there. It sounded like you had these different tones. But what I'm really interested in as well is not just the evolution of your tone, but when you would have started out in the industry, getting signed to a major record label and the classic concert tours and stuff like that, that would all be Mecca. But we've gone through this evolution of, first there was Napster, music sharing. All of a sudden, when you've heard your first MP3, you realize music is now ones and zeros. This changes everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you've gone through this whole evolution. But one of the big reasons I wanted to talk to you was you are using platforms like Substack, and now you're, social media, and SoundCloud, and all these different platforms to really, like, now it's allowing you as an artist to reach people on your terms, and all of the income, I suspect, from your writing musically, and the use of the English language is coming directly to you, which gives you an opportunity to be propelled out there to go where you want, do what you want. You don't have to deal with the classic used car salesman of the record label guy, and all that. I mean, that must be incredibly empowering. And finally, we're at that point where you could say, check mark, technology is working for the artist. I would say, I hope. I mean, that's part of what I was interested to talk to you about.
Yeah, for sure it is. And it's funny how things work out because for whatever there was seasons or periods where it's like, oh, I wish I could sell off my publishing, or I wish this would happen in my favor. Ultimately, what it has done is allowed me to have, and I'm not just about 100% control. I think that when the right people come into your life, you need to trust their abilities and trust their integrity, and that comes with sharing the profits and sharing the opportunities. Um, but one thing that has worked in my favor is as I've continued to build this catalog of songs, these songs are assets. They are real money making assets. And whether it's with sync placement in movies, or whether it's sync placement in video games, or whether it's the royalties collected if another artist plays your song, or you know every artist needs to see every single creation that they make in their bedroom or in a co-write or in a studio as a hard asset, and the more that you can create, the more assets you can accumulate and leverage. Now when you start divvying that pie up, sure, in really wonderful collaborations and great opportunities, that's the best case scenario. And I have brought myself to a point where I have full control, obviously with the exception of some co-writes where there's songwriting royalties split among the writers. I have control over my assets. My wife has control over her assets. And the accumulation of both of ours is a really robust collection that has allowed us to, well, the idea is to leverage them, and we have leveraged them over the years. But we're currently, I haven't made any announcements, but it's been out there that we're working on this record label thing as an entity that just sort of presides over us collectively and gives us the infrastructure to bring other artists in and share our resources. So, just kind of going back to the technology of it all, even one of the best things is it's getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to make better and better and better stuff.
Mm.
And there's also this rise of, I don't want to call it lo-fi, but with my iPhone, I can hit a voice memo and play my acoustic guitar into it and sing and pop that thing up. If a good song's a good song, it doesn't matter if it's just acoustic vocal or piano vocal, or maybe there's a bass in there or a couple lead lines. a good song's a good song, and with the opportunity to just pop that up online and have it start working for you, that is a very cost effective way of creating another asset for your business. So, and then there's the whole marketing. Like I've been leveraging Substack, and my Substack, for listeners that maybe aren't, it isn't a super popular platform, but what it does is it really encourages long form thought and predominantly writing. It is extended into audio and podcast areas, and there's the opportunity to be compensated by readers to access, sort of like a Patreon, but to access content sort of behind a paywall. And the spirit of the platform, I really found to be aligned with how I want to present myself in the world. You know, I'm not against TikTok, and I'm not against, I love Instagram Reels, and I'm not against these things at all. But what I connect with much more is being able to get, oh, got a train going by the house here.
Spirit of Johnny Cash.
Yeah, I really connect with getting bigger, longer thoughts out into the world, and this Substack has given me the opportunity to not just do that, but also allows people that have supported me and want to continue supporting me to do so in a fiscal manner. And then that just kind of leads into this album release that I dropped a couple days ago, where I've had just a wonderful show of support from readers and fans and followers, and I'm giving my upcoming double LP, it's 20 songs, double vinyl, shipping in to those that have an annual subscription. So it's pretty good. It's a pretty good deal. You know, vinyl's expensive these days, and I'm getting it to your doorstep for the
Well, it's
price
a
of
carbon
an
tax,
annual.
I'm sure. You know, they're probably putting the carbon tax on the vinyl now
Are
since
we
it's a
going to talk
fossil
about?
fuel.
Are we going to talk about the carbon tax? It's not even working. I don't
If you
think that
want,
works.
if you want to. Um,
We,
but
hey man, I'm all about, you know, my thing. Not to jump
we can
conversations
jump.
here.
We can jump. Let's do it. Sleep.
You know, politically, I think it's really important that we transcend the spectrum. That there's problems and that there's solutions, and some of those solutions might lean a little bit toward the left, and some of those solutions might lean a little bit more towards the right. And you know, maybe we can get to this a little bit later, but I think that the first thing that we need to do is start abolishing our affiliations with with the system and with what we're told where we're supposed to sit in a political spectrum, because we are told and we're sort of manipulated a little bit as to, you know, the left is compassionate and the right is more fiscally responsive. And, you know, over since 2020, we saw that the left isn't that compassionate, and we see that the right isn't that fiscally responsible. So it's kind of all up in the air. And I think the sooner that we transcend the political spectrum and really look at things case by case, situation by situation, and have a humility, demand a humility in our leadership. Our
Mm.
leadership is, especially in our province, is very ego driven. And I don't think it was always like that. I think in the last version of the leadership in the Saskatchewan Party, I believe there was a sense of humility and compassion, and I think that that has been eroded with the changes as the last over the last few years. Nonetheless, we get to reject that, and we get to, and being compassionate isn't a weakness. You know, being rigid isn't a strength. We get to hold ourselves to these standards that you know, there can be a fluidity of thought. And again, just to bring it all back around to the beginning of what I was saying, there's problems and there's solutions, and the more people that you get in a room and the more difficult conversations that can be had, you can come to some, I think, solutions really quick that work for at least the majority of the people. Now,
It occurs to me when you're talking that really only the strong can afford compassion in certain contexts. Because if you're coming from a place of weakness, that's where you have to be self-concerned. You can't spread it around. I mean,
yeah, you know, scarcity is. I really believe in the expansiveness of the human spirit, and I really believe that we all have the ability to give a little bit more than we maybe do give, and that doesn't necessarily mean money, and it doesn't necessarily mean time, but it just means maybe attention. And we can all give whatever whoever we disagree with. We kind of talked about that in sort of our pre-interview thing, that you just give the space and hold the space for people to have disagreements. And man, we're all human, and we're a heck of a lot more similar than we could than are ever different. And I like people that are different. I like people with different opinions than me. There's just a handful of them that I come across where I'm like, wow, you need to work on your shit, because you're coming at this from a place of ignorance. And as long as there isn't ignorance in the sense that, like, people can be ignorant and not know things, but at least be willing to be enlightened, and at least be willing to have a conversation. But we were talking
Yeah,
about
why did you feel compelled to talk about politics? Because sometimes I think we get also hung up on the idea like, well, artists should stick to their knitting and not get into that, and not
it's an obligation. So the backstory was, I mean, I was approached by the Sask Party at one point to throw my name in the hat as MLA, and I gave it some really serious thought. As that thinking process and as time played out, I became less and less connected to the priorities that party had, and more how they conducted themselves. I mean, politics are kind of six of one, half a dozen another. If there's a solution, if there's a problem, you come at it from the left or you come at it from the right. And if the problem's solved, or at least it's attempted to be solved, I don't really care if you're right leaning or left leaning. That doesn't matter. But it's how you conduct yourself. And I felt that there has been a massive lack of integrity within that party, and it really pushed me away from leaning into the opportunity of making some change in southeastern Saskatchewan through political avenues that I was approached to be a part of. And then all of a sudden, the NDP came to the table and approached me about running. And it was at that point that I took a full step back, and I'm like, wow, the Sask Party approached me and the NDP approached me. I had conversations with the Buffalo Party, and I had conversations with the Provincial Liberal Party. And all of these parties, or representatives within the parties, really had an accepting tone of how I kind of carry myself. I wasn't being rejected by, and I wasn't being rejected. And the ideas that I sort of spoke about in different conversations with different representatives and whatnot, it forced me to ask why me? And political parties can't agree on anything. And I was like, I wonder why me?
it's their job to disagree. So, but they all agreed on you.
Well, I was approached, right? So I was approached.
You're a catch politically.
I was approached by the right.
Because you have a voice, platform?
Well, I don't know. Well, I do know. I mean, that's why this record was written. It was because I stepped back and I said, I need to put these thoughts down in how only I can do it, and with the confidence that I can do it within. And I really dug into the nitty gritty of my outlooks on things. I'm not anti-corporatist, but I'm against big donors dictating how policy should be made. That's a big theme on the record is greed. There's abundance, and abundance is open-ended. But there's a difference between abundance and greed. And I'm really anti-greed and pro-abundance. And I also, there's other themes on the record. Just one of the big ones is, like, I think a lot of these grown men that are in positions to make policy. Again, before they start worrying about what other people need to do with their lives, I think that they need a lot of healing to do in themselves and have to check themselves. So that became another big theme, is because I can't think that of other people without doing that myself. So in the healing process, and this was before Dad's passing, this record was written. So there was a process of trying to understand myself before that that earth-shattering event of losing my father. Um, but the healing process is a big theme throughout the record. A tenderheartedness is a big theme in the record. Community is a big theme, and I found myself over the course of the last 20 years rolling into Langeberg, Saskatchewan, Limburg, Saskatchewan, Climax, Saskatchewan, Val Marie, you name it, and people are showing up. And, whether it's 50 people, 100 people, 300 people, no show is too small. And I really recognize that there is an authority that I carry in my attempts to be thoughtful and attempts to be publicly vulnerable and through humor, that big hard ideas and conversations can be navigated through. And I've been attempting to do that with song in rural communities, and will continue doing that through the course of, well, not just the course of this record, but for as long as I do what I do. It'll be with that tone and that basis.
Blake, you grew up in, throw a stone in one of the best places on planet Earth. You grew up with loving parents. You grew up, um, I just had Robert Angelic on the podcast. He wouldn't want to live anywhere else on planet Earth, knowing what he knows. One of the greatest researchers I've ever met.
Mm.
What are you healing from?
What am I healing from? I think we all get to I think we all get to heal. I think that right from the minute you come into this world, there are expectations that are imposed on you that are unfair. I think that, my family life growing up, it was loving parents, and that is presented in one light. And then there were some real difficulties in expectation, and maybe what some of us are, this is public, being on a podcast, and it's really personal stuff. Addiction is something that was really difficult in my growth from a young age, and that is both nature and nurture. Addiction is passed down through your blood, I believe, because I can feel it in my blood. I can feel it, and the difficulties of how that addiction comes into family dynamics is something is that needs to be dealt with. It just needs to be dealt with, and whether it's dealt with in the moment or it's dealt with years down the road, I think that all of us need to sort of take really hard looks at where we have come from and where we hope to go to, and in that process everybody can find something that they need to work at, and that's what I call the healing process. The biggest thing is self compassion. I call it radical self compassion. I'm not a radical until it comes to self compassion. It is a superpower to be able to see yourself and love yourself and recognize yourself in the innocence that you are. And I'm disciplined, man. I am super disciplined. And I kick my ass day in and day out with my workload that I need to do, and my goals physically, and my goals mentally, and my goals in emotional work and spiritual work. Like, I am very disciplined. And when it gets hard, there's no point in beating myself up that it's hard. It's so much more productive and effective to take a step back and be like, for as tough as a badass as I am, and for as hard as I push myself, I
Yeah.
am feeling like I need to just lighten up a little bit. And this happens in relationships. This happens in it is always in your best interest to not beat yourself up. It is always in your best interest. And only then can you kind of come at things again from a place of a little more clarity, a little more emotional clarity, and move forward through the heavy stuff and the hard stuff.
Well, I really appreciate that, man, and I really empathize with where you're at. And I feel like this is the time in our lives, the stage where we begin that process, because I think it's just at this stage where we just start to recognize that we do have things to address, because it manifests itself in our personal and professional relationships in such a way that it's a signpost. Hey, got some work to do. And one of the things that I was really wanting to talk to you about that I thought was really fascinating that I've been wanting to conquer in my life is that physical combat thing as a man. And maybe it's just, getting in there and getting humble enough to be beaten by somebody who's, 20 years my junior, getting my
Have you
ass kicked, but being able to take that punch. So I've never fought. I hate violence. Me and my brother, I think I've been in one fight. I got my ass kicked, I'll admit. And, my brother has never been in a fight, but at times there's been anger and there's rage and there's different elements as a man, but learning to manage that. But I mean, if we don't have the ability to really, I don't know how to say it, in the right context, but if we don't have the ability to be, if we're not capable of great violence and also at the same time controlling that, what are we? We're helpless. And you recently endeavored, like, and I think it's part of your whole journey there, to go and get your ass kicked and hopefully kick some other folks' ass in a controlled environment. Like, I would love to do that in 2024. I think it's, a mountain for me to climb personally. So when I was reading about that in your Substack, I was like, damn, I want to experience that. I want to, what is that? What is that like? What is that about? What has that done for you?
Well, I have a violent, I use the word, I guess it is, beating people up is violent. I got in some tilts, man. Like we
Yeah.
would, being 17, 18 years old, you get six, seven, eight beer in you, you head down to the park. There's
Yeah.
testosterone, there's adrenaline, there's sex, there's a whole bunch of things. There's all these contributing factors to make just the muckiest of situations. And we used to fight. Like we used to get to the park and you'd square off and you'd fight, or you'd be at a party and you'd fight, or you'd get in a hockey rink and you'd fight, or you'd get in the rodeo cabaret and you'd fight. And it was just like I didn't when I said my life was work and hockey and rock and roll, it was work and hockey and rock and roll and scrapping.
Wow.
And I got in a really precarious situation one night, specifically that quite scared me. And I made it through on the other side without, I say at this point, 25, 30 years later, 25 years later, without any real repercussions. But I thought I was going to be in some really deep life trouble because of a fight and hurting somebody. And it scared me enough to swear it off. And I did. I had about 19 years old. I don't think I threw a punch through my 20s, through my 30s. Oh, that's not true. I took a swing at a guitarist one time after a
I was
show.
wondering if that would be hard to
Yeah,
stop, because once you're good at fighting,
yeah,
it seems like a
yeah,
runaway train to me. Like if you're good at it, you do it all the time.
yeah. And there's also this sort of little bit of a respect that comes along with it, for as sort of
Yeah.
perverse as that sounds, right? Like you when
I
you can
respect you
fight.
for that. That's what I'm talking about. I mean, I'm envious of the fact that you had that experience. You fought like that. I never did.
Yeah, and so, but it never, that urge doesn't ever, it's never left me. I've always had to, if I found myself in situations where I had to defend somebody, or I had to defend myself, or I was in a pickle out in the world, um, and I sort of mentioned it in that one Substack. I was out at a bar this last winter, was it, or last fall. Guy wanted to buy me a tequila. I said, no, I don't drink. And he was like, well, you're too good for a shot. And I said, no, I haven't drank in 2 years. And I'm grateful that you want to, buy me something. But yes, it's all good, man. And he grabbed me and he grabbed me by the shirt and hard. And while he was holding me, took a pull off of his vape and blew it in my face, and every cell in my body just started to immediately move towards 19-year-old Blake. And it was
Yeah,
just like,
yeah.
and it was my wife and son at home that trusted me to go out to a show and not ruin our lives because I couldn't
Yeah.
control my temper was what kicked in, right? And I literally turned the other cheek. I stood there and I let him let go of me, and the smoke dissipated, and I took a breath, and it was what it was. And I walked into an MMA gym after that, and I said, that shit ain't gonna happen again. Like, at the very least, I need to be able to defend myself with an intellectuality, like, know how to defend myself, not just start swinging and throwing punches. There's a technique and there's an art form to this, and I need to know what that is. And through my journey of the martial art of jiu-jitsu over the last 6 months has been life changing. It's like songwriting. There's a poetry to it. There's a calmness to it. I want to be the most violent man in the room. No questions asked.
Yeah.
I want to be able to, and there's those, as a man, I like talking about being a man, because in this world where it's fun, where there's a lot of emphasis on identity. I really lean into that, and my identity, and I is my masculine. Like, obviously, I have strong feministic qualities, like we all do, but how I've defined my masculinity in the last little bit is rather stereotypical, and I really enjoy that. I really enjoy the fact that I like physical aggression. I really enjoy the fact that I like to provide for my family to the best of my abilities. And it's not to say that the role of my wife isn't also to provide for our family, but I hold those more, stereotypical masculine traits really quite dear. And not to take too hard of a left, but I became friends with a transgender woman, and it was her that really granted me the permission to lean into my masculinity.
Really?
And yeah, absolutely. And I was uncomfortable in the front, like, she moved into our building. I was uncomfortable in the beginning until she had such an impact on my heart and an impact in my life, and the community that she was a part of had such a generosity and a willingness just to live a normal life. Like, that's another thing that really pisses me off about this government, is how they are leaning into these divisive areas of pronoun usage and that sort of stuff. And I have my views, and I'm always open to having them changed. And it annoys me, full disclosure, when I go to apply for a festival and they ask me what pronouns I go to by, because and I don't know if that is something that is being considered in booking me for a festival, or it is an act of allyship. And I'd like to think that it is a benevolent act of allyship, and it doesn't have a role in whether I get the gig or not. And I've expressed this to my friend, and a lot of the time it's her opinion, being a part of that community, being a part of understanding at times her frustrations, that I reflect and I speak about and that has its influence on me. So
Perhaps it's been politicized on both sides to a detrimental effect. I mean, when you meet the individuals, the way, it's a totally different context than, the politicization of employment and like you applying to be a part of a festival and suddenly you're being screened on the basis of what? Or are you being screened, or are they just trying to genuinely do something from the goodness of their heart? Is it?
maybe, and I'll be the first to admit that I make a lot of mistakes along the way, and I make a lot of mistakes when I stumble through ideas, and my ideas and opinions are changing all the time. So we got this little moment captured in content here right now, and I'm totally, my opinions can change on this stuff. I guess what I was getting at was that, there are identity politics at play. And I find myself in times on the losing end of identity politics. And that is fine, because I'm on the winning end of many politics in
Right.
life. I'm on the winning end of I have nothing to complain about who I am, what I grew up in, my sexual orientation, who I associate with. All of that shit is working in my favor. So there's no complaint. It's a very petty thing for me to even sort of touch on. Now, that said, I do identify as how I am defining my masculinity these days. And it's really wonderful to lean into this aggressive trait and
Yeah.
how I have learned. What's the saying? It's like it's better to be um, a warrior in the garden than a gardener in
Yeah.
the war,
That's
right?
exactly. Because you had a song on there and it was about being a man. So that's kind of my question to you is what does it mean in a time when it seems very unclear, if not vilified, to just to be a man? Like toxic masculinity gets thrown around like it's something we're all guilty of, whatever, ethereal concept that is. Oh, it must be a toxic male. But I mean, I think there's a extremely healthy version of masculinity. And it's up to guys like you too to portray that and make it clear so that we can show to our kids that's also okay.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what that is. There definitely is a version of toxicity in humans, and both men and women can carry trauma, and both men and women have it manifest in toxicity. And there are different aspects to it, I think, in the different genres, genders. Um, the thing, I can definitely see some asshole in the parking lot sometimes and be like, that is one toxic ass male, and I want nothing to do with that guy or whatnot. But being aggressive isn't a toxicity. It's being strong-willed isn't a toxicity if it's not leveraged to bring and others that are weaker than you down. Like, it's really important to me in my aggressiveness in this record, and it's lyrically aggressive. It's the
Yeah, it
production's
is.
aggressive.
It's
the
heavy.
idea the idea of this record is to go for the throat, but I don't punch down on the record. It is
Mhm.
taking on the establishment, it is taking on people who abuse their power, it is taking on narratives that, there's a satirical aspect to the whole record, and I've always really found an aspect of what I do almost like stand-up comedy when I'm on stage and telling stories and making people laugh. Like,
Yeah.
satire is a really powerful instrument to convey a message. So I really lean into that, but it's it's like comedians. I don't respect a comedian that wants to punch down on a community that is historically oppressed. It's lame. Like, can it be funny? Sure, the people that want to laugh at it can laugh at it, and they're lame. End of story. We need to use our gifts that we're given and the gifts that we exercise and build to make a difference in the world. And usually that's by knocking those that abuse power and abuse the system, knocking them down a couple rungs. And that's the gist of this record, is to take those swings.
Yeah, it was very interesting. I did think it was confrontational, hopefully in a productive way. And I think it'd be really interesting too to go through all the actual words. Like words take on such a different meaning wrapped in music. And it's emotional context, so you can direct that. But if you extract the words out and read them, it's a totally different experience. So what would we experience if we read all your lyrics?
I think you'd have a different experience in the context of how they're read. Production. I could sing one set of lyrics with a soft tone and
Right.
a gentle cadence and minimalized production,
Yeah.
and it can be received emotionally in a different way than if I have the amps turned to 11 and the faders all the way up and distortion on the guitars and a distortion in my vocals.
Yep.
And so the production is actually the vehicle to convey that emotion of the lyrics. A lot of this stuff, a lot of the stuff can be, out of context. Well, there's one big line in the last song of the record that says, "Take me in context. It's all that I'm owed." And that just means through the course of the record, not everything is literal. Not everything is metaphorical. Not everything is to be taken at face value. That is the beauty of art. Is it's the interpretive process. And yeah, the lyrics don't fall short of granting the listener an opportunity to interpret in context.
You could just switch it from minor to major, and it would.
You nailed it. Yeah, that's a songwriting trick, right? Like you throw a minor chord in there, and that conveys a quote unquote sadder tone. You have major chords, and those convey quote unquote happier tones, happier emotions. So yeah, it's all in the progressions, and that's what I've always loved about songwriting, right? The language of it is more than just the words. It's this multi-layered beast that you get to wrangle in and experiment with and be brash with, and it's fun right now to take art and be aggressive with it and just see how it lands, because you're protected by interpretation, right? And there's different aspects on the record where the lyric is the lyric and it says what it says, and there's no other way to interpret it other than at face value. And then that's countered with songs that are intentionally written in a very specific way to connect to a very specific person with a very specific language. I have a song called "Where Have All My Horses Gone," and it's actually a rewrite of a song that I released in 2012. And I say, I sort of sat on the lyric for a while because it's politically incorrect. But I say they hate the natives and the gays. And in one context, that would be such a thoughtless way of expressing the two communities. But in context, it's potent with the language used of who I'm trying to connect to and who I am speaking to in the context of the song.
I'm thinking about the juxtaposition of you as a 16-year-old songwriter, lean, mean, drinking, smoking, fighting, fucking machine. I'm sure.
Woo!
Right? And then
the fucking was a little bit later, but no, yeah. Not a 16.
You want to tell that story?
Oh boy. No, but I was a drinking machine, yeah. Yeah, never smoked cigarettes. I had my first cigarette at 30.
I'm just guessing, taking a while
35,
guessing.
But anyways.
I smoked some cigarettes with your dad. Had a couple
Did
drinks
you?
with your dad. I just assumed. You know what I mean?
You love to smoke cigarettes.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you're a 40-year-old lean, mean, songwriting family machine, business machine.
Yeah.
What are there times you would prefer one or the other? You wish you could switch back and forth? Do you miss that, or it's all 40-year-old lean and mean family business machine?
I am that. I can make the choice at any moment to be what I want to be. There's no wishing that I was something in my younger years. I definitely don't miss alcohol in my life. I loved it.
You've been sober?
I've been sober for 2 years. Yeah, and I really
good for you.
pushed. I really denied that word. I've been off and on, not drinking.
You denied the word sober?
Yeah, until I realized that I'll never drink alcohol again. Yeah.
Why?
Because I think not to get.
Tell me.
Because it doesn't. I don't have any desire. That's just it. I think it's a frequency thing. I think that you just get beyond what it offers, and I've attained what alcohol used to give me tenfold in a sober mind.
How?
Whether it's confidence, just by the hard work that's entailed of self-betterment, like where I would drink to be confident to speak to a girl or anybody, it doesn't matter, just like where alcohol would give me that confidence to speak to somebody. The absence of it, I have tenfold the confidence to walk up to somebody now. And it's, I almost can't really explain it. Will I don't have any desire to drink. I'll buy people drinks. I got nothing against it. I'll always encourage people to try and have a hiatus from it and see where it goes. But that's kind of like anything. Try anything. And then the weed was just really got in the way of the difficult work. Alcohol was never something I used to mask issues. The weed was something that I used to mask issues. The weed was something where I was there just it there, I would tell myself that I'd like to that life was there's this joke in the music community that weed's just a little bit of reverb on life. Like it just makes it just a little bit, just feel
Yeah,
and sound a little bit.
Fender weed reverb.
Yeah, yeah, feel a little bit better. And I haven't smoked in 2 months, and it's another thing where I don't think I will ever touch it again. So and it's not too profound. It's just it doesn't align with me any longer. I don't have the desire, and I think that as time passes, and it's facing what had to be faced with in its absence.
Mm,
I started smoking. I quit smoking weed for a while, and then Dad died, and I was just like dive bombed into it because
yeah.
I didn't know what else to do, and it was just masking the grieving process to such an extent that I knew I had to have a, a truly sober baseline in order to receive the benefits of grief. And by letting cannabis go and by staying true to sobriety with alcohol, I love a coffee, but
We'll give you that.
whatever, man. Like, come on.
But
Actually, I
that's
had a couple
interesting
of
too, because in the context of your lifestyle, I mean, you were telling me you're down in Nashville and your wife's in Saskatchewan with your son. I mean, you're away. These things obviously could be cumulatively, detrimental to your functioning as a family, with distance and your environment, and you're playing in bars where people are imbibing and carrying on as such.
yeah. And well, addiction's addiction. Like just because I'm
Yeah.
not drinking and not smoking weed, it's the addictions are still I can still lean into the addictions. And I work out every day now, and that's
Good for you.
something that is just like it's like that responsibility of getting up at 6 in the morning and doing chores for 2 hours before school and 2 hours after school. Like it's non-negotiable, right? And then I learned that I needed to work out every day when I started getting my ass kicked in the gym and getting
Right.
strangled and getting, you know, stars and having a concussion and having my ankle twisted off and breaking a rib. And like all this stuff happened in the course of 6 months where I'm like, well, I really enjoy this art form and I'm really pushing my boundaries of this art form. But if I don't build a stronger body, I'm just going to keep having to take time off to heal opposed to opposed to having the robustness to continue in my training. So,
You never maybe felt you're 40 until you went there. Like I'm 48. That's part of I had a buddy who told me like it's crazy to think about trying to wrestle with somebody who's 20 years younger or 30 years younger that loves getting punched in the face. Like you're past it, man. Like give it up. Like the concept's great. But I'm thinking, I don't know. I feel
oh
I
no,
mean,
it's oh yeah, no, dude, you got old man strength. That's a thing, right? Like that.
well,
Now that's
also
just
I've been
starting to
working at
kick
it
in.
too. I've been working at it for 10 years. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel that, and it'd be interesting to test that. But it's the defense thing. It's the ability to know in any given situation that I can neutralize somebody in a loving but deadly way, like to
Yeah.
protect, yourself or your family or friends or loved ones in a certain situation. I think that's important for every man, and it's not something that I've conquered yet, but I have a feeling I will.
You can just lean into it with all the discomfort that all of us had in those
Yeah.
first moments. Like it's crazy how uncomfortable it is to
Oh, I can't imagine.
engage in something like that. And like I do sparring as well. I
Yeah.
haven't in the last since I got to Nashville, but boxing and Muay Thai, not as much as the jujitsu, but that's a whole nother thing. And then that's when you start getting punched in the face and you learn something different. In jujitsu, you don't get punched in the face.
Hmm.
striking isn't a thing. It's more grappling and it's maneuvering a body and submission tactics and stuff like that. But when you start getting punched in the face, you start thinking a little bit different. And you think it hurts a little more than it does. You
Right.
think that the idea of getting punched in the face, you're like, ooh, I never want to get punched in the face. Until you get punched in the face a few times, you're like, eh, you know, it's not that, knock on wood, I don't want to be getting punched in the face anytime soon, but in a controlled environment when there's an agreement between two people, getting kicked in the side of the head and getting punched in the face, like it gives you a headache. But also that's the agreement that you're engaging in as well. And it's really calmed me. Like, that's the irony of it
Really?
is that it has been such a calming spiritual practice to be methodic with my movements and think my way through different openings of space when grappling with another person and rolling with another person. Just the intellectuality of the sport has really engaged me, and yeah, it's been a
That's so
zen
cool.
like
Yeah.
uh, endeavor. Yeah.
Yeah, I won't go into the story in detail, but I did have like a business competitor from probably about 10 years ago now that I couldn't sleep at night because I thought he was going to eat my lunch. And he ended up incredibly tragically pass away from a bar fight in Toronto. Not that he didn't, maybe he had that ability, but he went up against somebody that was capable of deadly violence, like trained like he was military. Unfortunately, and just obviously it wasn't the guy's intention, or I don't know what happened, but he's
Yeah.
dead. Like this guy's dead. He
Man,
died because
that's
of it, and that's the kind of thing where, and you're probably in those situations quite a bit, not that, but you're in that space where anything can happen in a bar fight. Um,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have a son. Do you have children?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, would you, you don't want to vocalize it, but what would you do to protect one of your children?
Well,
Like,
and there's a difference
if,
between thinking you can and knowing you can, having the proven technology. And I don't, there's
yeah.
probably a small subset of moves that it would be very functional. But one thing I want to touch on too before we run out of time and energy here was, this spiritual leadership aspect of your family. And you said you have a couple spiritual leaders in your family, and you're also pursuing it. And you guys have actually experienced it recently in terms of, uh,
Mm.
from what I read and what I understood in your eulogy of your father, that you've experienced some of that. Talk to me about that. What does that entail? What does that look like for you guys?
What you're referencing is the super phenomenal experience of my dad being around my dad's bedside hours before he took his last breath. He So dad fell. That's what happened. Is he was picking some freaking choke cherries one night, or Saskatoons, and no one was around, and he fell in the bush and he got caught up between a couple trees, and he spent the night in in a in the bush in the field. No one was around. He contracted hypothermia in July. In July it got cold enough to give the man hypothermia, and then he went septic, and he passed in that process. So we were around his bedside, um, and he moved when he was taken off of the life support, because that was another really difficult decision in the emotional leadership that I have in my family, was to recognize that was the most humane, but also that was the decision that needed to be made, was that the outcomes of him on life support would have been so much more terrible than engaging in the process of moving beyond this physical realm. So that decision, was very, very difficult, and it was made, and they just come in and they just start unhooking everything, and that's its own version of really a really traumatic experience. And he moved into this holotropic breathing, which was just big breaths in and big exhales and big breaths in and big exhales. And if a healthy person like you and I were to do that I've actually done a holotropic breathing session, and my arms cramped up and my body started to cramp up because all the blood was leaving my extremities and moving into the core of my body in this hyperventilation, induced hyperventilation. The idea is to elevate a consciousness in that practice, but it just wasn't. Of all the things I've experimented with, it was not for me. So Dad moved into this, just like it was like a metronome. It was like the second hand on a clock, just like over and over and over and over. Started at 5 o'clock that evening, and on the 7th, July the 7th, and it ended at 5 o'clock in the morning. So for 12 hours, he was in a holotropic state of breathing. Again, what I was saying, if you and I were to do that, we'd be lightheaded and be going somewhere else in a matter of minutes, really. But he did it for 12 hours. And I always just thought, like, what was and his eyes were open, but he was non-responsive. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, with my mother and my two sisters and myself, my brother had come in that night, and they left. Him and his wife left at 11 o'clock back to get back to the farm. He had little boys back staying at a neighbor's house. They had, responsibilities to leave. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, we witnessed a little point of entry, a little blackish dot I saw above Dad's body blast into a welder's arc that filled the room, or like you put a spoon in the microwave, like a blast of white light that totally encompassed everything in the room. And it wasn't lightning, and it was its own version of light. And it was just like, and it sort of had had a life to it for a couple seconds, it had movement for a couple seconds, and then it collapsed into that point again. And I've been talking about this openly because I share the experience with 3 other people, and we all had. Actually, that's not true. Jody was sleeping at that point, at that first one, but it woke her up. She's like, what just happened? And we shared with her that we just witnessed something happen, not knowing what it was. I wasn't afraid. I think Mom was, I don't know if none of us were afraid, but it was definitely beyond this. I don't use the word normal, but this is what we've experienced in life thus far. And I called out. I said, Dad, is that you? And immediately, again, there was that single point of that single point above his body, and this time the light flashed to both ends of the room out laterally, just, and it was almost like, it kind of was weird. It wasn't lightning, and it wasn't fire, and it wasn't electricity. It was its own thing. It was its own shooting of something of the sorts, and then sucked back in to that point of entry again. And we knew we witnessed super phenomenal, paraphenomenal. I don't even know the word. Like, what? It was a spiritual blessing. It was some kind of lifting of the veil between what we perceive our reality is and what is the truth of our environment. Immediately after that second one, there was a ball of light outside the hospital window that my sister witnessed. It disappeared. It appeared again further away, disappeared, appeared again further away, and then it manifested into a lightning storm on the horizon. And I don't know what to make of all of it, right? Like, what do you,
I was going to
you
ask
know,
you, what does that tell you about our
you
life
know,
here? What does it give you any answers?
no, no, it doesn't give me no answers. Um, but it's challenged my faith. I kind of moved through these periods of having, I don't want to call it a rigidity, but there was sort of um, we grew up in the church, and there are stories shared and ideas shared in this concept of heaven. The idea of heaven is just too simplistic for me. This idea that there is another quote unquote place where our ancestors all line up and there's God is there. I just in that moment it felt to me like heaven isn't a thing. And I don't want to sound, that's the beauty about having a faith is it gets challenged, and
Yeah.
you lean into the challenge and you find your way through it. And my biggest thing, I've always been a seeker. I've always been one that wants to understand and what is the truth of our reality. And I spend so much time reading about it and following different spiritual teachings and trying to understand all this stuff. And my realization lately is that kind of gets in the way of our actual divine work that needs to be done on this plane. And you can spend all your time trying to find an answer to something, or you can do the work that you're here to do and just trust in the process. Just trust that whatever it is what it is, and we don't need to know what it is. What we need to do is be in the moment, be focused, um, ultimately creating. That doesn't just speak for me, that speaks for any of us. Creating great moments for our children, creating strong relationships, creating and other creations, whether it be art or opportunities. But we're here to create, and that is the divine purpose, is to be in this realm and create with a full force and be in the moment and not worry really about what the answers are.
Well, kudos to your dad for going out, in a big
With a
way. I mean,
bang.
I'm thinking like I want to go out like that, man. And as far as
Yeah.
creation goes, creating a beautiful space in southeastern Saskatchewan on the farm, and then all you kids are so talented. I mean, I knowing Jody and her sister, and I don't know Jarrett, but obviously you guys are all creating lots of cool stuff. It's pretty amazing as far
Yeah.
as what your dad and the stories he told. He seemed very excited to share the stories about his life. He's the kind of guy, it didn't take much, and he would talk. He and I don't remember all the specifics. Although we talked a lot about the auction mart business that he grew, and a lot of stories around that and stuff. But you could just tell he was a man that lived a lot, and he was a big community guy.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys had an epic funeral there. Like it was, from what I understood, it was when you get that
Yeah,
many
it
people
was
coming together, it's a
it
life well
was
lived.
almost 800 people. I think over 700 people came out to the funeral. Yeah.
It says a lot, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it's special. Sure miss him. Cry every day. Think of him every day. And I just guess in closing on this point, you get told, oh, time heals and this will pass, and you're going to get on the other side of this, and just different comments like that. And I actually kind of, whenever I think of my father, I get a visceral reaction. My throat tightens, and I get tears in my eyes well up. And if I'm having a moment of a little less control, I can emote on the spot, and I do every day. And I hope that never dissipates. I hope that version of love just lives in me for the rest of my life. I hope that I can be 75 years old and think of my dad 40 years since his passing, and I hope I can cry. I hope that love is so profound that it just moves me to emotion immediately. I hope that never leaves me. It's a really beautiful aspect of the grieving process, is recognizing that this version of love only presents itself in these circumstances.
That's incredible. And good on you for just feeling it and staying in it and not masking it and not drowning it or smoking it out or whatever, distractions are offered here.
Hmm.
Just staying in it. And yeah,
Yeah.
some of the strongest men I've known, my grandfather and my dad, they can get pretty emotional, you know, strong masculine men, but
Well, it's a requirement to be strong.
yeah,
That's part of being strong is to be emotive, and it's like a pressure valve, right? It has to be released, and if it's not released, it some really damaging things start to transpire.
yeah.
Emotionally damaging things that it's a requirement to be able to be open. And I think that's something that's really wonderful about our generation is that we are sort of, I don't want to say the first, but we're understanding our role emotionally as men, and I hold a lot of value in that.
Well, and back to the theme of this episode, you know, fantastic thing is you're able to share this on all these platforms with folks that can connect with you. And I
Yeah.
heard this story before you told it today. I'm blessed to have heard it again and to have known your dad and to be friends with Jody. I really cherish her friendship, and but somehow through the magic of all this technology, we can connect over Zoom and hear from you in Nashville. Uh, Saskatchewan farm boy making his way in the world, creating some really great stuff. And I think that, yeah, I don't know really where to take it conversationally from there. I think it's time you do some chicken picking here.
I'll close with a tune that I actually I wrote for my mom and my sister. You know, there's a duality in in this process, and my father was a patriarch of the family. He made some big decisions, and he had these really wonderful qualities of moving on instinct, and it would always turn out, and if it didn't turn out, it wasn't done turning out, and he was able to just really have this wonderful leadership in our family. And I realized also in his death that our family was always a matriarch. It was always the neck that turned the head. It was always my mother that held this really incredible um, place of faith and this really profound place of leadership. And it was passed on down to myself and my brother. We really, and my sisters, we're all really wonderful products of our parents' union. And this song is on the new record. Excuse me. For my mom and my sisters. I'll close with this. It's called Farming Wives. Farming wives are farmers. Do the books, make a bed. Heart of the home quarter. May the neck turn the head of he who sits and eats my supper. Farming wives and daughters in a day overruled, head above the water. Soon the kids finish school, carting them across the country. Farming wives are farmers. Like the elevator against the prairie sky. The legacy of farming is owed to farming wives. Farming wives see further, living through all they did. Son, respect your mother, it's hers as much as his. Straight down the center. Farming wives are farmers. Farming wives are farmers. Farming wives are farmers. Farming wives are farmers. Farming wives are farmers.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Pleasure, my man. Appreciate you being such a thoughtful interviewer and sharing your platform for people to share what they share. This was a really wonderful experience. Grateful for it, my man.
Ditto. Ditto. I'm very grateful, man. Proud of you.
Yeah, thank you.
How can people find you if they haven't found you yet?
Man, I don't know. I guess these days you go on Spotify and you look up Blake Berglund, and there's a bunch of records on there. I've been leaning into my Instagram lately, maybe using that as the channel that I put my energy in to get my message out. And of course, my Substack. That's the best way. Blake Berglund, BlakeBerglund .substack, SUBSTACK.com. BlakeBerglund.substack.com. It's called The Straight and the Narrow. And between now and February the 2nd, if you become a paid subscriber, you're going to get my new record on your doorstep free of charge, a 20-song double LP concept record that leans into my rural upbringing, the shifting political landscape at home, my cultural conditioning, and what I feel is my role in all of those dynamics. So, yeah, paid subscribers get the album free until February the 2nd. And then on February the 2nd, we play in Regina, Saskatchewan, one show at Dark Hall as the vinyl release party with my wife, Belle Plain, and a young songwriter from Rokenville, Lachlan Neville. The three of us are going to be performing that night, and tickets are on sale now at darkhall.ca.
Well, keep up the good work, and I want to dedicate this particular episode of the Growing the Future podcast to my good friend Jody Berglund, who I love very much. I'm very proud of her. She's been a really good friend, and through her I get to know your family better, and now I get to know you better. What you say and what you sing and what you write really resonate for me. Keep on doing what you're doing. Keep up the good work, and thanks for sharing everything that you did all the way from Nashville. It's like Grand Ole Opry on Growing the Future podcast.
Perfect. One day.
One day. I feel like it's right around the corner for you, man.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan. Have a good night, my man.
Yeah, you too.